Hey, hey, step away from that door. I see you. I've been watching you. And I'm on the phone with the police right now. So don't you move. Sir, I live here. This is my house. I'm just trying to find the right key. They gave me a whole ring at closing and I haven't figured out which. Your house. Sure it is. Yes. Hello? Police? I need to report a burglary in progress. 6007, Belhaven Court. There's a black male, big guy, trying to break into the Hale residence. No, I know for a fact the owners aren't listening. I've lived on this street 25 years, and I am telling you, those are times, not times the kind of people who live in that house. He's got something in his hand. I can't tell if it's a, yeah. Yeah. He's trying the door right now. Please hurry. Sir, I am the owner. My name is on the deed. My wife and daughter are inside that house right now, Nicole. Baby. Stay inside. It's okay, sir. I have the key in my hand. Watch. It's going to turn. Don't you touch that door! Don't you dare go in that house! You people think you can just watch this neighborhood. You understand me? I watch it. Nothing happens on this cul-de-sac I don't see. I knew the second I laid eyes on you that you didn't belong here. And I was right. Wasn't I? Standing there jimmying a door at 9 o'clock at night. You picked the wrong street. You picked the wrong man's street. The police are coming, and you are going to learn that there are still places in this country where we don't just let anybody. And the key turned. The lock on the front door of 6007 Belhaven Court turned smooth as butter under Darius Hale's hand. The way a man's own key turns in his own lock. And the door of the house he had closed on 11 days earlier swung open onto the warm light of an entryway full of half-unpacked boxes, where his wife Nicole stood white-faced with their 6-year-old daughter Maya half hidden behind her legs. Because it was his house. Darius Hale had spent 9 years saving for that house. He was the first person in his entire family, going back as far as anyone could trace, to own one. And the man on the phone screaming that those weren't the kind of people who lived there, Dale Renner. 25 years on that cul-de-sac. The self-appointed eyes of Belhaven Court had just said the words, times. Those are not the kind of people who live in that house. Times. Into a recorded police line. In his own voice. With the date and the time stamped on it forever. Within a month. Those words were going to cost Dale Renner the house he'd lived in for 25 years. But first, let me take you back to how Darius Hale came to be standing on that porch with a key to a home a man refused to believe was his. His name is Darius Hale. In the fall of 2006, he was 34 years old. And the night Dale Renner called the police on him was supposed to be one of the best weeks of his life. Because Darius Hale had just bought his first house. You have to understand what that house meant, because the whole story lives in it. Darius was an accountant, a good one. Careful, quiet. The kind who caught the error everybody else missed, and he'd grown up the way a lot of people grow up. In an apartment his mother rented and re-rented her whole life. In buildings where the heat was a rumor in January, and the landlord was a ghost. You only met on the first of the month. His mother had cleaned office buildings at night for 30 years and never once owned the roof over her own head. Never once had a wall. She was allowed to paint a color she chose. And she'd told Darius all his childhood the same thing. Get you a piece of ground. Baby. Get you a deed with your name on it. They can do a lot of things to you in this world. But they can't move you off your own ground if it's really yours. That's the one wall they can't get behind. So Darius got the piece of ground. It took him 9 years. 9 years of an accountant's discipline. The budgets, the saving, The credit built one careful payment at a time. The down payment growing in an account he didn't touch. Couldn't touch. Wouldn't let himself touch. While he and Nicole rented and waited and looked. They'd been outbid twice. They'd had a mortgage pre-approval questioned in a way that, looking back, Darius was pretty sure had nothing to do with the numbers. Because Darius knew numbers. And the numbers were good. But they kept at it. And in the late summer of 2006, they found it. A 4-bedroom on a quiet cul-de-sac called Belhaven Court. A good school district, a yard for Maya. A kitchen, Nicole cried, in the first time she saw it because she could already see Thanksgiving in it. 6 houses on the cul-de-sac, number 6007. It cost more than Darius's mother had earned in a decade of cleaning offices at night. And Darius Hale signed for it with his own name and his own credit and his own 9 years of saving. And at the closing, they handed him a ring of keys. And he sat in the car afterward and held that key ring and could not speak for a minute. Because his mother had been right. And he'd done it. And the deed had his name on it. We own a house, Nicole said, in the car, holding his hand on the key ring. Darius, we own a Times house. We own a house, he said. And then, because he was who he was, careful and quiet and a little overwhelmed, I gotta figure out which of these keys is the front door. There's like 9 of them. That ring of keys. Hold on to it. Because 11 days later, it's going to be in his hand on a dark porch while a man screams at him to ask where he stole it. I have to stop here. This early. Because I need you to understand the specific shape of the thing that happened to Darius Hale. The exact assumption under it. Because it's a particular one and it matters. Dale Renner did not look at Darius Hale and see a man doing something suspicious. That's the lie that the Dale Renners of the world always tell afterward times. I'd have called about anybody acting like that. No. Read it back. Darius was standing at a front door with a key, trying the lock. That is the single most ordinary, most innocent thing a person can do at their own home. Nobody on earth calls the police about a man unlocking a door with a key unless they have already decided, before the first ring of the phone, that the man does not belong to the door. And that's the assumption. The precise one. And Dale said it out loud. On tape. So we don't even have to guess at it. Those are not the kind of people who live in that house. I don't recognize him. Not something seems off. The kind of people. Dale Renner had a picture in his head of who lived in a house like 6007 on a street like Belhaven. A nice house on a nice street. And the picture did not have a black man in it. And so when a black man appeared at the door of that house, Dale's brain did not conclude times I must be wrong about who lives there. It concluded times that man is a criminal. Because in Dale's world, it was easier to believe a man was committing a felony than to believe a black family had bought the house 2 doors down. That's the specific poison. It's not hatred exactly. Not the burning kind. It's a picture in the head, so fixed that reality has to be a crime before the picture will be wrong. Hold that. Here's the man who held it. Now, let me tell you about Dale Renner. Because the police are on their way, and you need to know the man who called them. Dale Renner was 61 years old, and he had lived on Belhaven Court for 25 years. Since back when it was new, and somewhere in those 25 years, Dale had quietly crowned himself the king of it. Not officially, there was an HOA. And Dale was on it. But it wasn't really about the HOA. It was about Dale's idea of himself as the man who Times watched. He had the security cameras. 4 of them, angled to cover not just his own property, but the whole mouth of the cul-de-sac. He had the neighborhood watch sign staked in his yard. The one he'd lobbied for. He kept a notebook. People found out about the notebook later of cars that didn't belong. of visitors, of the lawn services and the cleaf crews and the delivery drivers. License plates and times. A quarter century of a man cataloging everyone who passed who wasn't, in his estimation, supposed to be there. Dale Renner experienced all of this as service, as vigilance, as keeping the streets safe. He'd have been genuinely baffled, even wounded, to hear it called what it was, which was a man who had appointed himself the border guard of a place that was never his to guard, and who spent his retirement deciding, from behind his blinds, who got to belong. And the thing about a self-appointed border guard is that the people he watches hardest are always the ones who don't match his picture. The neighbors knew this about Dale. In the way you know something you've decided not to look at directly, they knew Dale called the non-emergency line a lot. They knew the new ones at the end had had the police sent on their own teenage son once, walking home from a friend's. They knew the black UPS driver had gotten so much grief from Dale that the company quietly changed the route. They knew. And they did the thing neighbors do, which is shrug and say that's just Dale, and be privately glad it wasn't them. And that shrug, 25 years of that shrug, was the soil Dale grew in. Nobody had ever made Dale Renner face what he was. So Dale kept being it, with a clear conscience and a fully charged phone, right up until the night he pointed it at a careful, quiet accountant who, unlike everyone Dale had ever bullied before, was not going to shrug. He'd already started in on Darius earlier that week. The small way. The testing way. Darius had been carrying boxes in on moving day, and Dale had come down to the end of his own driveway and stood there, arms crossed, watching, not offering to help, not saying welcome, just watching, and finally calling out, "You with the movers?" "No, sir," Darius had said. Easy, friendly, because he was new and wanted to start right. "I'm Darius. My family's moving in. We bought 6007. Nice to meet you." A pause. A long one. "Huh," Dale had said. Not welcome. Not congratulations. Just huh. And a look that traveled all the way down Darius and back up. And then Dale had turned and gone back inside without another word. And Darius had stood in his new driveway with a box in his arms and felt the temperature of the whole street drop 10 degrees. And known the way he always knew. The way his mother had taught him to know exactly what that huh meant and exactly what kind of neighbor he'd drawn. He'd told Nicole that night, "The guy across the way, Dale, he's going to be a problem. You don't know that. Give him a chance." "Baby." Darius had looked at her. "I gave him a chance. I gave him a great big smile and a nice to meet you. He looked at me like I came to steal his lawnmower. I know that. Look, I've known that look my whole life. He's going to be a problem. I just don't know how big yet." He found out how big 4 nights later, at 9 o'clock, on his own porch, with his own key in his hand. It was a Tuesday. And it was ordinary. And that's the thing I keep coming back to about it, how completely ordinary it was. Right up until it wasn't. Darius had worked late, the way accountants do in the fall, and he'd stopped to pick up dinner. And he got home around 9. And the porch light was off because they hadn't figured out the switch yet in the new house. And he came up the dark walk with the bag of food in one hand and the ring of keys in the other. And he stood at his own front door in the dark and started trying keys. Because 11 days in, he still hadn't memorized which of the 9 keys on the closing ring was the front door. And a few of them looked alike. Try one. Doesn't fit. Try another. That's it. That's the whole crime. A tired man trying keys at his own door in the dark. He heard the door across the cul-de-sac open. He didn't think anything of it. And then the voice. And the flashlight beam hitting him in the back. And you heard the rest. But let me give you the part you didn't hear. The part underneath the 911 call. Because while Dale Renner was narrating a burglary into his phone, a whole other thing was happening inside Darius Hale. And it's the most important thing in this story. Darius Hale was afraid. Not the way you'd think, not afraid of Dale. Exactly. Afraid of the Times call. Because Darius Hale was a black man in America in 2006, and he knew, the way you know your own pulse, exactly what a 911 call about a black male trying to break in. Can't tell what's in his hand could turn into when the police came rolling up on a dark porch, hot and ready for an armed burglary. He knew men had died on their own porches that way. He knew the most dangerous thing in that whole situation was not Dale Renner's contempt. It was the police car about to arrive, believing Dale Renner's version of reality. And so Darius Hale did the thing his whole life had drilled into him, the thing his mother started teaching him before he was 10. The calculus that every black parent in America teaches their child, and no white parent ever has to. He made himself slow, and calm, and visible, and harmless. He could hear his mother's voice in it. The lesson she'd given him in a kitchen 1,000 times. The one that had felt like too much when he was 9, and felt like prophecy now. If the police ever come up on you, baby, you go still. You make your hands part of the conversation out. Open. Slow. You say yes, sir, and no, sir, and you do not raise your voice no matter what they say to you, no matter how wrong they are. Because being right will not save you, and being calm just might. You can be furious. You be furious later. At home. With me. In that moment, you are smooth as glass. You hear me? Why? Mama. He'd asked her. 9 years old. Why do I have to do all that if I didn't do anything? And she'd knelt down and held his face in both hands. And he never forgot it. Because the not doing anything won't be enough. Baby, I wish to God I could tell you it would. But it won't. And I would rather break your heart now, in this kitchen, than have somebody break the rest of you out there. Because I was too soft to teach you. You are going to be twice as careful and half as free as the white boys you go to school with. And it isn't fair. And it's the truth. And the truth is what keeps you alive. So you learn it. You learn it now. He'd learned it. And 25 years later, on the porch of the house he owned, he was using it not as a frightened boy, but as a calm grown man, performing on his own front step the ritual of harmlessness. His mother had cried teaching him. 11 days into the dream, she'd told him to chase. He set the bag of food down on the porch where everyone could see his hands. He did not raise his voice. He did not move fast. He kept his hands open and away from his body. He got his ID out slowly and held it ready. He prepared. On his own porch. 11 days into owning his first home. To perform for the arriving police. The elaborate ritual of non-threat that might keep him alive. Because a man 2 doors down had a picture in his head. Nicole. He called toward the door. Even and clear. Baby, I need you and Maya to stay inside. All right? Everything's fine. There's a misunderstanding with a neighbor. The police are coming, and I need you to stay in the house and let me handle it. Okay? I love you. Stay inside. That's a thing that should break your heart, if you let it land. A man reassuring his wife. Managing his own family's safety. Calming a 6-year-old. While being the victim. Because he understood that his being the victim would not protect him. That he had to be twice as calm as any innocent person should ever have to be. or it could go very wrong very fast. Dale Renner got to be hysterical. Dale got to scream and accuse and call the law. Darius had to be perfect. Because the cost of being anything less, for him, was so much higher. That imbalance, Dale's freedom to lose his mind versus Darius's life or death obligation to keep his, that's the injustice. Sitting right there in the dark. Before the police even arrived. The police arrived. 2 officers. And to their credit, and I'll give credit where it's due and not pretend they were villains, because they weren't. And the truth is more interesting than the cartoon. They did the job right. They came up cautious. Because they'd been told armed burglary. But they did not come up shooting. And when Darius, hands visible, calm, said officers, "My name is Darius Hale. I own this home. My ID and the deed are right here. My wife and daughter are inside. And that man called you because he doesn't believe a black family lives in this house." They listened. They looked at the ID. The address on the ID said 6007 Belhaven Court. Because Darius, being careful, being an accountant, had updated his license the same week he closed. They asked him to open the door. The key turned. Nicole appeared with the deed and the closing papers and Maya's school enrollment for the new district. All of it in a folder because Nicole, too, had learned the lessons life teaches. It took about 4 minutes for the 2 officers to establish, beyond any possible doubt, that Darius Hale was exactly who he said he was, standing exactly where he had every right to stand, doing exactly nothing wrong. And then one of the officers turned around and looked at Dale Renner, who was still standing at the edge of the scene. And the look on the officer's face was the first turn of the screw. "Sir, this is the homeowner. His ID matches the address. This is his house." "That's no. The Hales don't," Dale faltered. And you could see it. The picture in his head cracking against the facts, and the picture losing, but losing slow, the way these things lose. How was I supposed to know? He was at the door in the dark, fiddling with the lock. What was I? He was unlocking his own front door. "Sir, in the times dark, at times 9 o'clock, any reasonable person would have." His porch lights out. "Sir," the officer's voice had gone flat. Professional. But there was something underneath it now, and he had a key. "You told dispatch he was breaking in. You told dispatch you knew for a fact the owners weren't home and that he wasn't the kind of person who lived here. That's a sir. You made a number of specific statements on a recorded line." A recorded line. And there it was. The first time anybody said the word that was going to undo Dale Renner. Recorded. Dale Renner, 61 years old. 25-year king of Belhaven Court, stood on the cul-de-sac he'd appointed himself to guard and felt, for the first time in 25 years, the ground tip under him because he'd finally pointed his vigilance at a man who wasn't going to shrug, on a night when his own mouth had been writing down the truth about him the whole time. And Darius cleared now. Vindicated. The danger past did not gloat. That was the thing the officers noticed. The thing Nicole noticed through the open door. The thing that told you who Darius Hale was. He didn't get in Dale's face. He didn't say a single one of the 100 things he had every right to say. He just looked at Dale Renner for a long, level moment. The way a man looks at something he's seen clearly and won't ever have to wonder about again. And then he turned to the officer and said, quiet and precise, "Officer, I'd like the report number, please. And I'd like it noted that I'll be requesting the recording of that 911 call. Through the proper channels. In writing." He said it calmly. The way an accountant reads back a figure. I'm not going to do anything tonight. Tonight, I'm going to go inside and have dinner with my family in my house. But I want it on the record that I am not letting this go. And I want it on the record that I asked for that recording while everybody was still standing here. That's all. Thank you for coming out. And if Dale Renner had had the sense to be afraid of anything that night, it should have been that not the screaming, not the accusations, but the calm. Because a man who screams has spent his ammunition, a man who quietly asks for the report number and the recording, in writing, while you're still standing on the lawn, has not even started. Hold on. I have to come up for air. Because the thing that's about to happen to Dale Renner is the rare kind that's both completely deserved and completely self-inflicted. And I don't want you to miss how clean it is. Nobody framed Dale Renner. Nobody set him up. There was no trick, no twist. No secret, powerful friend of Darius's who swept in to crush him. That's not what happened, and I want to be clear about it. What happened to Dale Renner? Dale Renner did entirely to himself. With his own phone and his own mouth and his own 25-year habit of believing his picture of the world over the world itself. He called the police on an innocent man, and because he was so completely certain he was right, so utterly unbothered by the possibility of being wrong, he didn't bother to hide a single thing. He said the quiet part out loud, on the record, with a timestamp. He'd gotten away with the quiet part his whole life, precisely because he'd never had to say it out loud, because everyone around him had agreed. For 25 years. To let the quiet part stay quiet. And the one time he finally said it where it couldn't be unsaid, it was because he was so sure of his own righteousness that it never occurred to him there'd be a reckoning. That's the justice in this one. And it's a particular flavor of justice. And it's my favorite flavor. The wrongdoer convicted by his own certainty. Dale Renner was undone not by his enemies, but by his absolute confidence that he didn't have any. Okay, let me tell you what Darius did with it. Because Darius is the one who made the Justice Land. Here's what most people would have done. And it's worth saying, so you see what Darius did instead. Most people, after a night like that cleared, vindicated. The cops gone. The neighbor humiliated on his own driveway. Most people would have gone inside, hugged their family, poured a drink, and let it go. Chalked it up. Been grateful it didn't go worse. Tried to forget it and get on with the business of living in the house. And nobody on earth would have blamed them. Because confrontation is exhausting, and Darius had a job and a family and a life, and the path of least resistance is always to let it slide. Darius Hale did not let it slide. And I want to be careful here, because the lazy version of this story makes him a crusader. And that's not it. Darius wasn't looking for a fight. Didn't want one. Would much rather have just enjoyed his house. But Darius Hale was an accountant. And an accountant's whole nature is that the error doesn't get to just stand there. You don't ignore the number that's wrong. You correct it. And more than that, much more than that, Darius had a 6-year-old daughter who was going to grow up on that cul-de-sac, who was going to walk to that bus stop and ride her bike on that street and grow up under the gaze of a man who'd called the police on her father for unlocking their own door. And Darius Hale was not times, going to raise his daughter in the shadow of Dale Renner's blinds and call that home. I'm not letting it go, he told Nicole. That night, after Maya was finally asleep. I want to. I'm tired and I want to. But I keep thinking about Maya at that bus stop with that man watching her. And I can't. He doesn't get to do that to us and then just go back to his cameras like nothing happened. Not this time. Not to my family. Not at my house. What are you going to do? The boring thing, Darius said. and there was the ghost of a hard smile on him. I'm going to do this the way I do everything. Quiet. And careful. And completely by the book. And I'm not going to give him one single thing to point at. He went loud. I'm going to go times thorough. We'll see which one wins. He was right that it was boring. And he was right that it won. Now here is how the justice came. And it came decisively. And every single piece of it was a thing Dale Renner had handed him. First, the recording. Every 911 call is recorded. And every 911 call is, in most places, a public record that a citizen can request. And Darius Hale, careful, thorough, requested it. In writing. The proper way. And he got it. And it was so much worse than anyone remembered. Because in the heat of the night, people only catch pieces. But the recording caught all of it. Every word. In Dale Renner's own voice. Calm and certain. I know for a fact those are not the kind of people who live in that house. I've lived here 25 years. He's got something in his hand. I can't tell if it's a weapon. That last part times, I can't tell if it's a weapon. Said about a man holding a key and a bag of takeout. That was the part that turned stomachs. Because that was the part that could have gotten Darius killed. The deliberate seasoning of a false report with the one word, guaranteed, to bring the police in. Hot. The recording was not a man who was scared and made a mistake. The recording was a man constructing a lie designed to be dangerous. And it was all there. In his voice. Forever. Second, the false report itself. Filing a false police report is a crime. Darius didn't have to invent anything or stretch anything. Dale had reported a burglary in progress that was not happening. By a person he claimed to know for a fact didn't live somewhere he did live. And Darius, calmly, by the book, made sure that the appropriate complaint was filed and pursued through the appropriate channels. Not screaming for blood, just documenting accurately what had occurred. And declining politely, relentlessly to let it be swept under the rug as a misunderstanding. The system grinds slow and imperfect. And I won't pretend it delivered some perfect hammer of doom. But Dale Renner, who had spent 25 years summoning the law down on other people, found the law. For the first time, turned around to face him. And it was not a comfortable thing to face. And it cost him fines. A citation. A mark on a record that had always been spotless. And lawyers' fees that a retired man on a fixed income felt in his bones. Third, and this is the one that actually broke him, because it was the one that touched the only thing Dale Renner truly had, which was his standing on that street, the pattern. Because once Darius started pulling the thread kept coming. He wasn't the only one. The non-emergency call logs, also public record, told a story 25 years long. Dale Renner had been calling the authorities on his neighbors, on visitors, on workers, on time's children, for decades. And when you laid it all out in Darius, being who he was, laid it all out in a clean, quiet, devastating summary. The kind of summary an accountant makes, the pattern was undeniable, and the pattern had a color to it, plain as day, and there was no explaining it away. The Nguyen's son, the delivery drivers, the lawn crews, a quarter century of one man deciding who didn't belong, and the deciding always falling on the same kinds of people. Darius didn't editorialize. He didn't have to. He just made it visible, shared it, calmly and factually, with the HOA, with the neighbors, in the daylight, where everyone could finally see the thing they'd spent 25 years agreeing not to look at. And the street, which had shrugged at Dale for a quarter-century times. That's just Dale. Times could not shrug anymore. Because you cannot shrug at a thing once it's laid out in front of you in black and white with your own family's name in the log. The shrug died. And when the shrug died, Dale Renner died with it. Socially. On the only patch of earth where he'd ever been a king. Now let me tell you what happened to each of them. Because the itemizing is where you breathe out. And this one breathes out good. Dale Renner lost the thing he'd spent his whole retirement building, which was his place as the man of Belhaven Court, and he lost it completely, decisively, and entirely by his own hand. The legal consequences were real, but they weren't the worst of it. The worst of it, for a man like Dale, was the eyes. The neighbors saw him now. Not that's just Dale, they times saw times him. Saw the 25 years of it all at once. And they could not unsee it. And the seeing changed everything. The thing about being the self-appointed border guard of a place is that it only works if the place agrees you're its protector. The day Belhaven Court stopped seeing Dale as the man who kept it safe and started seeing him as the man who'd nearly gotten a neighbor killed over a house key. Dale's whole reason for being evaporated. People stopped waving. The HOA, mortified, distanced itself from him fast. The cameras that had felt like protection now felt, to everyone who walked past them, like surveillance, like a creep behind the blinds. And people said so. Dale Renner had spent 25 years deciding who belonged on that street. And in the space of about a month, he became the one person on it who no longer did, and he felt it every day, in every averted eye, and he could not stand it. And so Dale Renner did the thing that is the perfect, poetic, entirely self-inflicted end of this whole story. He sold his house, and he moved away. The man who had screamed times. Those are not the kind of people who live in that house. The man who had appointed himself to keep Belhaven Court the way he thought it ought to be. The man who could not bear the idea of a black family. 2 doors down, that man packed up his cameras and his notebook and his 25 years and left. Because he could no longer stand to live on the street he'd tried to defend. Now that the street had seen him clearly. Nobody ran Dale Renner off. No mob. No cavalry. No powerful enemy. Dale Renner ran himself off. With his own phone and his own mouth and his own certainty. And the last thing he did on Belhaven Court was the one thing he'd tried hardest to make a black man do. He left. The contempt didn't just get mirrored back at Dale Renner. It moved him out of his own house. There is a justice in that so clean it's almost funny. And I'd feel bad about how satisfying it is if the man hadn't earned every inch of it himself. The 2 police officers, I told you I'd be fair to them, and did their jobs correctly, on a night when doing the job correctly was the difference between a story with a moving van at the end and a story with a funeral. And that matters. And I won't pretend it doesn't. But they're not the heroes of this. And they didn't make the justice happen. They cleared the scene and went home. The justice happened because Darius made it happen. After. In the daylight. The slow, boring, thorough way. I mention the officers, only to be honest. It could have gone so much worse in those first 4 minutes. And the fact that it didn't is not a triumph. It's just the absence of a catastrophe. And we shouldn't confuse. Nobody died with justice was done. Nobody dying was the floor. Darius built everything above it himself. The neighborhood, Belhaven Court, got something it didn't know it needed, which was a mirror. For 25 years, that street had been quietly complicit in Dale Renner, had let the shrug do the work, had been privately relieved every time his gaze landed on someone else. And in the aftermath, some of them had to sit with that. the Nguyen's, whose son Dale had once had the police called on, told Darius their version. Finally, out loud. And there was a kind of grim relief in it. The relief of a thing long suffered in silence, finally being named and believed. Not everyone came around. Some folks resented Darius for stirring things up, for making them look at it. Because there's always somebody who'd rather have the comfortable lie than the uncomfortable truth. And that's real, and I won't airbrush it. But enough of the street woke up that the texture of the place changed. There was a moment, a small one, that Darius held on to. A week or so after the call logs went around, Mrs. Nguyen from the end of the cul-de-sac came up his walk. One evening, the mother of the boy Dale had once had the police called on, and she stood on his porch. The same porch. And she didn't quite know how to start. Mr. Hale, Darius. I wanted to say... She stopped. Started again. When it happened to my son, 5 years ago, Dale called the police on him walking home from his friends. Said he was casing cars. He was 14. He had his backpack on. Coming home from doing homework. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. And I didn't do anything. I was scared. And I told myself it was a misunderstanding. And I told my boy to just take the long way home from then on so he wouldn't have to pass Dale's house. And I have hated myself for that for 5 years. That I taught my child to hide instead of saying out loud that a grown man did that to him. She looked at Darius. And then you came along and you said it. Out loud. You made everybody look. And my son is grown and gone to college now, but I called him and I told him. Somebody finally said it out loud. And he cried. Mr. Hale. He's 20, and he cried on the phone because somebody finally said it wasn't his fault, and it wasn't in his head. She wiped her eyes. Quick. Embarrassed. So, thank you. That's all. I should have been the one. But thank you for being the one. You don't owe me a thank you. Mrs. Nguyen. Darius said gently. You owe yourself a little grace. They make it so hard to say it. They count on it being hard. That's the whole trick. Still, she said, I'm saying it now. Welcome to the street. Darius, you're the kind of people who ought to live here. And she went home. And it was a small thing. 2 neighbors on a porch in the evening. And it was also the whole thing. The entire point. The silence finally breaking one voice at a time. Some of them woke up like that. Not all. Enough. And Darius Hale stayed. That's the whole victory. And it's a quiet one under all the satisfying downfall. Darius Hale and Nicole and Maya stayed in the house at 6007 Belhaven Court. The house Darius's mother's voice had told him to go get. The piece of ground with his name on the deed. The one wall they couldn't get behind. He'd done everything calm and careful and thorough, given them nothing to point at. And he'd won not by becoming the angry man Dale's picture said he was, but by being exactly the man he actually was, the careful, quiet accountant who doesn't let the wrong number stand, and letting that be enough. Because it was enough. He raised his daughter on that street. He painted the walls, the colors they chose. And the man who tried to decide he didn't belong there was the one who left. Here's the good that got left behind. And it's the right size local. A single street. A single family. The small, real scale of an ordinary life defended. And it's the best kind because it's the kind that gets to grow up. It's Maya. Maya Hale was 6 years old the night the police came. And she'd been scared. The way a 6-year-old is scared when there are flashing lights and grown-ups using hard voices outside her new house. And Darius and Nicole did the thing good parents do with a thing like that. They didn't pretend it hadn't happened. And they didn't let it become the story of the house either. They told her the truth. At 6-year-old size. And then they made sure the bigger truth, the truer one, was the one she grew up inside. This is our home. We belong here. A man made a mistake about us because of an ugly idea in his head. And your daddy didn't yell and didn't fight. He just told the truth. Calmly. Over and over. Until everybody had to see it. And the man with the ugly idea is the one who had to leave. And we're still here. Because this is our home, and nobody can move us off our own ground. Maya Hale grew up on Belhaven Court. She rode her bike on it and walked to the bus stop on it and had her friends over and grew up tall and certain in a house her father owned. And she grew up with a story she'd carry her whole life, not a story about being a victim, which is the story Dale tried to write for her family, but a story about her father, who, when somebody powerful and certain and cruel pointed the law at him on his own porch, did not panic and did not crumble and did not become the thing they said he was. He stood on his own ground, with his own key, and told the truth and held on. Calm and thorough and unbreakable, until the truth won and the liar left. That's the inheritance. That's worth more than the house. And the house was worth 9 years. She'd tell that story herself, when she was grown, about the key, and the porch, and the dark. And her father's steady voice through the door times, stay inside. Baby, everything's fine. I've got this times when everything was not fine, and he had every reason to be afraid, and he kept his voice steady anyway, so she wouldn't be scared. About what it looks like, up close, when a person decides who belongs and who doesn't, and about what it looks like to answer that, not with rage, but with the quiet, unanswerable fact of your own life, lived openly and proudly on the ground you earned. That's the something good. One girl, raised to know exactly what she's worth and exactly where she belongs, by a father who proved it on a dark porch with a key. So come back with me one last time to a front door. The same front door. 6007 Belhaven Court. A few years on, the porch light works now. They figured out the switch a long time ago. There's a basketball hoop in the driveway and a kid's bike on its side in the grass and a wreath on the door that changes with the seasons. And there's a man coming up the walk in the evening light, tired from work. And he reaches into his pocket and takes out his keys, and he doesn't have to hunt through 9 of them anymore. He knows the one. His thumb finds it without looking. The way your thumb finds your own door key after a few years. And he puts it in the lock, and it turns. Smooth as butter. Because it's his lock and his door and his house and his ground, and he goes inside to his family. A man once stood across that cul-de-sac and called the police to say that the man at that door was not the kind of person who lived in that house. He said it into a recorded line. Certain. Righteous. 25 years, the king of his little street. And the key turned. The key turned then, and it turns now, and it will turn every evening for as long as the Hale family wants to live there. Because it was always every single second. Their key and their door and their home, and the only thing the man across the street ever proved, with all his watching and all his certainty and all his calls, was the one thing he could never have stood to know, that times he times was the one who didn't belong. That a man who'd decide a thing like that about his own neighbor, on the evidence of nothing but a face, had no business on a street with decent people on it. That the kind of people who live here, the kind who earn their ground and stand on it and tell the truth and raise their kids to know their worth, That kind of people was the Hales, and the other kind. The kind who watches from behind the blinds and decides who's human and who's a suspect. That kind packed up his cameras and left. He said those are not the kind of people who live in that house. He was right about exactly one thing. In the end, though never the way he meant it, by the time it was all over, there was only one person who'd ever lived on Belhaven Court who truly wasn't the kind of people who live there. And he was the one who moved away. So let me ask you something before you go, because this one is closer to home than we like to admit. Dale Renner wasn't a monster. That's the uncomfortable part. The part worth sitting with. He didn't burn a cross or shout a slur. He thought he was one of the good ones, vigilant, responsible, looking out for his street. He had a picture in his head of who belonged, and the picture felt like common sense, like safety, like just times, noticing times, and it was so comfortable and so invisible to him that he said it out loud to the police without a flicker of shame, because he genuinely didn't know it was the ugly thing it was. And that's the thing that should give all of us a little chill, because every single one of us has a picture in our head too, of who belongs where, of what a person at a certain door, in a certain car, in a certain neighborhood, must be. We all have it. The question is not whether you have the picture. The question is what you do when the world contradicts it, whether you say, I must be wrong about who lives here, or whether, like Dale, you decide reality must be the crime. So be honest with me. The real honest. The kind that costs something. When's the last time your picture didn't match what was in front of you, and which did you trust? The person or the picture? We've all had the moment. Most of us, thank God, didn't have a phone in our hand and a 911 dispatcher on the line, but the flinch was there. The little times that doesn't fit. And what we did with it in that second is the whole ballgame. Tell me about yours down in the comments. I'll tell you about mine. Because I've got one. And the only people the picture owns completely are the ones who swear they don't have it. And if this one got into you somewhere, if you've ever had to prove you belong somewhere you'd every right to be. Or if you just want to be the kind of person who trusts their eyes over their assumptions, do me a kindness. Like this. So it reaches the next person who needs the reminder. Maybe somebody with a phone in their hand and a picture in their head. Share it with somebody who's been made to prove they belong. And subscribe. Because this whole channel is about exactly one thing. What it costs us. Every single time. To decide who belongs before we know a single true thing about them and what it's worth when somebody stands on their own ground. Calm and unbreakable. And makes the truth impossible to ignore. The key turned. It was always going to turn. It was his door the whole time. Trust the person in front of you, not the picture in your head. The picture has gotten an awful lot of good people killed, and it has never once been worth what it cost